To know on BloombergQuint Live, I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines. Asian markets are edging higher at the start of the final trading day of a volatile week. The Prime Ministers of Canada and the United Kingdom called for an international probe into the Iranian plane crash, saying that the Boeing 737 that was brought down by a surface-to-air missile. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Brexit is passed in the House of Commons by 330 votes in favour compared to 231 against. Prime Minister Narendra Modi says fundamentals of the Indian economy remain strong and it still has the capability of reaching the $5 trillion mark by 2024. And finally, Infosys will kickstart the third quarter earnings season for the Nifty 50 companies. Analysts are anticipating a strong quarter from the Bangalore-based IT giant. Let's talk about the US markets. Now, US stocks registered yet another record closing after focus shifted back to trade negotiations between the US and China. The Dow Jones was the outperformer among the benchmark indices, and as you can see, it's just 40 points shy of that 29,000 mark. Renita Young of Bloomberg News wraps up Thursday's Wall Street action in this report.
U.S. stocks closed higher on Thursday as the S&P 500 headed for another record, all as investors piled back into risk assets as they did not worry about the U.S. and Iran being on the brink of a war, which they were not. During the session, we saw mall-based retailers take a huge drop in same-store sales, which sent shares plunging. I'm talking about Kohl's and JCPenney, which ended lower, but Victoria's Secret owner L Brands came off of its highs, although it ended slightly higher. Meanwhile, gold and WTI crude oil were lower. Palladium during the intraday reached another high. However, it's currently down, and the U.S. monthly employment report will be out on Friday. That should give us a better look at the U.S. economy. And that's a look at your Wall Street action on Thursday. In New York, I'm Renita Young for Bloomberg News.
All right, let's also turn to the Asia-Pacific region and see how markets are faring there. I'm joined by Rosalind Chin, who's joining us from the Bloomberg studios in Hong Kong. Morning, Rosalind, and happy Friday to you. We're looking at gains at the end of what has been a very volatile week, right?
You're absolutely not wrong there, really. Very volatile. But things starting to calm down a little bit, it would seem, as, of course, we see tensions, geopolitical tensions start to recede a little bit as the U.S. and Iran step back from escalation. That was happening yesterday, and we see a bit more of that has been seeping into the markets. And also, of course, starting to look ahead to other factors, like, for example, the U.S.-China trade deal, the Phase 1 trade deal, which looks likely to be signed next week. We know that Liu He, the Vice Premier of China, is heading to Washington Monday to Wednesday next week for what looks like a pretty high-profile signing ceremony there, and also some business deals that will be signed as well during his time there. So we're looking at some markets with a bit more positivity creeping in towards the end of the week. We've got the MSCI Asia Pacific Index up by almost 1/3% right now. We've got the Chinese markets, Shanghai Composite opening high. It's currently up about 1/5%. CSI 300 up by more than 1/5%, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index is up by about 1/4% right now. I also want to very quickly look at Taiwan because it has a presidential election tomorrow, which will see the incumbent Tsai Ing-wen of the DPP vying against the Kuomintang, the KMT's Han Kuo-yu. And we see the markets in Taiwan, the TAIEX is up about 1/4% right now. Now, economy is likely to be a big factor in people's minds as they go to make their vote tomorrow. We've seen a faster growth under Tsai Ing-wen, also a surge in investment, but incomes of the average people on the street in Taiwan haven't risen as fast as the government or they probably would have liked in the last few years. So that could be a factor as people go to the ballot box. On the corporate front in Taiwan, we've got TSMC, the world's biggest maker of made-to-order chips. It's reporting December sales. Right now, TSMC is up by 0.4%. Finally, a quick look at Australia. The S&P ASX 200 up by about 2/3%. We did have some better than expected retail sales numbers out of Australia, but they were for the month of November. We're going to be looking, as will the RBA, at some of the figures in the month of December, as of course it looks at the impact of those fires before its February meeting to decide whether it's going to move on rates or not in Australia. So right now the S&P ASX 200 up by about 2/3 of 1%. So overall, market is looking a little bit calmer towards the end of the week and positivity creeping in. Back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Rosalind. Now, I do want to talk a little bit more about what Rosalind mentioned at the start of what she was saying on the Asia-Pacific markets, focus shifting back to US-China trade talks. And China has confirmed that its top trade negotiator, Liu He, will be visiting Washington next week for signing the phase 1 of the trade deal with the United States. The Chinese delegation will also include PBOC Governor Yi Gang and Commerce Minister Zhong Shan. Sarah McGregor of Bloomberg News brings you the latest.
I think from the U.S. side, they're eager to show that this deal is much more than just about increased agriculture purchases from China of American farming exports. Well, that's important for Trump's base, his farming base, and for his re-election bid. You know, I think they really want to show that there's some meat on the bones of this deal, and getting U.S. companies and Chinese companies working together and more entrenched in each other's economies, I think, will be a key part of that.
Now, Sarah, this ahead of a potential phase 2, which President Trump said he wants to start negotiations on right away. But given this is an election year, it looks like that will also see protracted negotiations.
Absolutely. Trump himself said that phase 2 deal could come even after the next elections, expected now for November 2020 this year. And so that seems somewhat reasonable of a timeline, given the fact that those are when the hard issues need to be discussed, things that China will not give up easily, like industrial subsidies or some of these more tougher standards for IP, so that it's assured that China is not stealing intellectual property, which the U.S. accuses it of. And so I think, it then begs the question, though, will there be a political reason for Trump to seek a phase 2 deal and go through all that pain with China if he's already into his second term, if he does win re-election?
Now, most parts of Australia are bracing for record temperatures of the weekend as bushfires continue to rage out of control across a large part of the country. Ed Johnson of Bloomberg News, who has been tracking this closely, gets you more details.
We are back into that extreme danger territory again. South Australia is looking bad. We've got a huge area from the East Gippsland region of Victoria State. That's an area the size of Belgium, pushing up into the Victoria Alps, across the border into the south coast of New South Wales, all of which was hit hard last weekend, is looking like it will be smacked again today as winds pick up and as temperatures start pushing up to about 43 degrees Celsius. Now, firefighting authorities have warned people in those areas to get out if they can or enact their bushfire survival plans, and we'll be monitoring that news closely as the conditions worsen throughout the day. We are hoping that it won't be as bad as last weekend, which saw the death toll tick up to 26 nationally since the disaster began in September. We're now looking at about 11 million hectares of land burned across the country. That's an area twice the size of Switzerland, quite extraordinary. 1 billion native animals killed is the latest estimate from the University of Sydney. Insurance claims pushing past 700 million, 2,000 properties destroyed. It really has been an incredible disaster.
Now, at about a quarter of 240,000 Australians have been urged to evacuate their homes. But what's the feeling among people in these affected communities? Are they going to fight to save their homes again?
I'm struggling to hear you a little bit. I think you were asking me whether or not people would be staying and fighting to defend their homes.
Yes, that's correct, Ed.
Mixed feelings from people that we've spoken to on the ground. People are very stoic in Australia. They are used to battling fires. It's part and parcel of the Australian summer. But this season has been extraordinary, and many people that we've spoken to on the ground in the south coast of New South Wales and in East Gippsland have have taken the decision that they are moving to safer areas. They're moving to the boat ramp in that picturesque town of Murugappa and deciding to leave their homes. They're moving to sports fields, which are being protected by the Royal Fire Service, and simply saying that it's just not worth the risk.
All right, well, with that, let's turn to what's making headlines across the globe. Sue Keenan of Bloomberg News brings you the first word headlines.
China has confirmed that Vice Premier Liu He will lead a delegation to Washington next week for the signing of the so-called Phase 1 trade deal. Now, Liu has acted as President Xi's top negotiator throughout the tariff saga. China says he will be in the U.S. from Monday through Wednesday for the signing ceremony. And President Trump has said he will fly to Beijing afterwards to begin talks on the next deal. Boris Johnson's Brexit bill, meanwhile, has cleared its final hurdle in the House of Commons, ending years of parliamentary gridlock in the UK. MPs voted 330 to 231 in favor of the withdrawal agreement bill, which now goes to the House of Lords for ratification. Johnson wants the bill passed into law this month so the UK can leave the European Union on the 31st. He campaigned in the election on the promise to get Brexit done. Moving to China, its new Hong Kong liaison officer has paid a courtesy call on Chief Executive Carrie Lam, with the two saying that they are confident the city will recover from months of unrest. Lord Wei Ning takes over with Hong Kong in recession and facing store closures and job losses as the anti-China protests rumble on. Financial Secretary Paul Chan has told Bloomberg the government will spend boldly to bolster the economy.
Altogether, the amount comes to about 25 billion, together with the measures we announced in the last budget, which was in the order of about 45 billion. These two together can help our economy by about 2%.
To Australia now, much of the country is bracing for the return of record hot weather this weekend. This as bushfires continue to burn out of control. Thousands of people across the country are being urged, I should say, to seek safety. And state emergency warnings remain in place as temperatures look set to increase. Last year was Australia's hottest and driest on record, and the fires are seen by many as the consequence of global warming. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, followed by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts, powered, I should say, in more than 120 countries. I'm Sue Keenan. This is Bloomberg.
All right, let's turn back to India now, and Darshan Mehta is joining me to tell you all about the trade setup for the day and also what's happening in the futures and options space. Darshan, stellar gains across the board for Indian markets yesterday. Could we possibly see some profit booking at the end of the week?
I really doubt it, because the fact that we've been strong, we were down 250 points, we've recovered all of that. We are again headed close to new highs. So it seems that at this point of time, the power is with the bulls and with global, issues. I just read that the U.S. House of Representatives have cut limited Trump's powers for war. So I think geopolitical tensions probably could ease, and that is what the Indian markets could look at. Crude has come off for the fourth day. So on that basis, I'm really surprised that the SGX 50 is down in trade while most of the Asian markets have done well. But still, it's 2 hours to go. Anything can happen by that point of time. But it somehow doesn't indicate any sense of weakness currently. The ADRs did well. Couple of first of all, the Nifty up almost 200 points. The rally was broad-based also. The mid-cap and small-cap end of the market have done well. Of late, we've seen that the mid-cap and small-caps have done extremely well. Again, 2.5% gains coming in on the Nifty Bank, the Nifty PSU Bank, and the Nifty Bank, which was dragging the index over the past few days, has managed to move up in trade. What has done well? Tata Motors again up almost 4%. ICICI Bank is trading at a fresh 52-week high. So there is enough traction that's happening on the ADR front. HDFC contributed ahead of the numbers. Infosys was up almost 4%. Dr. Reddy's was up almost 1%. So overall, broad-based gains that are coming in. FIIs continue to remain net sellers. They sold in 400 crores. DIs bought in almost 420 crores in the cash market. So there is enough traction that's happening on our market. Now, what contributed? ICICI Bank, Reliance, HDFC and HDFC Bank. So finally, after a while, the HDFC twins have started contributing. Reliance is doing well, and ICICI Bank has been on a stellar run. Ahead of the numbers over the past few, ahead of the Infosys numbers, TCS has been seeing a lot of negative traction. So the pair trade seems to be people are going long on Infosys and going short on TCS. Coal India had news of its own, but nevertheless a 190-point gain on the Nifty itself. What happened on the futures and option market? Obviously, fresh buying was seen. Look at the open interest build-up. 10% open interest build-up was seen on the Nifty. 1.5% gain that came in. The Nifty Bank saw a huge amount of short covering, which gives an indication that there could be more room for the Nifty Bank to actually move up. And as I said a while back, it was the Nifty Bank which was dragging the index. So still short positions are being built, and if the market continues to rally, they will be squeezed out in trade. Where are positions being taken? We are at the 12,200 mark in trade. Look at the writing that the put writers have done from 12,200 to lower levels. So they have written, if the market continues to rally, the 12,200 call and 12,300 call will be forced to shed positions in open interest. And remember, over the past few days, when the Nifty managed to crack, call writers became extremely aggressive writing on the market. So the 200-point move was basically on account of squeezing them out. What is again happening in terms of open interest build-up? See, yesterday, if you see 12,000, 12,100, 12,200, heavy amount of put writing happening, and the call writers didn't write that much, given the fact that they expect. This probably gives an indication that the market is not looking weak. It is looking much stronger to rally in even further. So that's the trade setup. The VIX actually came down 10%. It was a risk on trade. So 10% down on the VIX. PCR obviously had to move up, as you saw that the put writers were much more active than the call writers. 1.58 versus 1.24. So put writers becoming aggressive. But remember, PCR also now moving into a slightly dangerous territory of almost 1.6. Which were the counters that managed to rally? Again, you saw that Sun TV had open interest build-up of 20%, but fresh buying was seen to the tune of just 1%. Ahead of the numbers today, Infosys saw massive amount of open interest build-up. DLF hitting 52-week high open interest build-up, and Amara Raja doing well. It saw open interest build-up of almost 9%. Ramco saw a little bit of shorts after the big rally that we saw over the past few days. In terms of companies which saw short, the big one was Max Financial, open interest down 16%. So all the longs which were there got unwound in trade. Obviously, everyone was anticipating a deal to be announced. That's nothing coming in, but heavy volumes in the counter. Again, short covering was seen in Cholamandalam. The other counters that were in focus, Tata Elxsi short covering in Canara Bank, and long unwinding in Mindtree.
Thanks so much for that, Darshan. All right, now let's take a closer look at some of those stocks that Darshan mentioned. In fact, some of them are in the news. Somit Sarkar is here to tell you all about those stocks. Good morning, Somit. What's on your list today?
Good morning, Alex. I'll start off with the earnings that came out yesterday. GTPL Hathway. Now, the revenues were up nearly 2 times, but that was because of the inclusion of the EPC business, which was not present in the base year, that is the last year. Revenue ex EPC grew only 41%. Net profit was up 77%. EBITDA was high by 56%. Margins were lower at 18.1%. Now, the cable TV segment revenue was up 42%, and the internet segment revenue was up just 16%. Other than that, HDFC, because they have completed the acquisition of Apollo Hospitals Group stake of 50.8% in Apollo Munich Health, along with that Sterlite Tech, because their arm has acquired nearly 13% stake in an Israeli company which belongs to the industry of virtualized radio access network. This company also helps telecom companies set up 5G network. Delta Corp, now their arm has received a license to operate a casino in Nepal. Now the company has entered into a memorandum of understanding for leasing space at Marriott Hotels in Kathmandu. GMR Infra, because they have formed a joint venture with Hong Kong's ESR Cayman to develop a 66-acre logistic and industrial park at Hyderabad Airport City. Now, the project outlay would be around 550 crore rupees, while GMR's stake in this would be around 30%. Kena Construction, because they have sold the Valaya toll unit to Cube Highways at an enterprise value of 529 crore rupees. BSE would also be in focus because they have received a certificate of registration from IRDAI, that is the insurance regulator, to commence insurance broking business. Now the exchange plans to launch this insurance business by early February. Lastly, couple of stocks on the back of bull deal. Firstly, Jindal Stainless. Kotak Special Situation Fund has acquired nearly 2.5 crore shares in the company, and the sellers were PNB, SBI, Allahabad Bank and IDBI Bank. And lastly, Sadbhav Infra, where Reliance Mutual Fund has acquired nearly 1 crore shares, while Nomura was the seller.
All right, thanks so much for that, Soumit. Now on to earnings, and recent acquisitions are likely to boost Infosys' third quarter performance. Brokerages too are expecting the IT bellwether to raise its FY20 guidance. Agam Vakil is standing by to tell us what the street is anticipating from Infosys.
In what is a seasonally weak quarter for the Indian IT sector, Infosys is expected to report steady earnings. Start off with your dollar revenues. We're likely to see an uptick of around 1.4% sequentially. Those in rupee terms likely to see an uptick of around 2.4%. We're also expecting EBIT to grow by nearly 5%, where that would mean that margins could expand to around 22.2% against 21.1%. Consequently, profits are likely to rise nearly 4% on a quarter-on-quarter basis. Now, in terms of the growth, we are expecting, extended furloughs to keep growth in check. However, we must remember that because of the fact that the company has made a lot of acquisitions in the year, that will likely aid their year-on-year constant currency growth, which is expected to stand at around 9%. Well, moving on, there could be some amount of slackness when it comes to the banking and financial sector. However, we could also see some strength when it comes to the insurance vertical. Moving on to operating margins, we're expecting an overall expansion, and the reason here is, one, because of the weaker rupee. Secondly, of course, because of the cost efficiency measures that the company has taken up. However, what may work against margins is also the fact that, subcontractor costs remain elevated, as has been the case over the last 4 quarters, and employee costs will likely increase because of an increased hiring, considering the company has taken up a lot of large deal wins. Well, moving on to guidance, we are expecting an upward revision of the guidance, which currently stands at around 9 to 10% for the current financial year. Also, the current guidance for the operating margin stands at around 21 to 23%. Moving on, among the most important factors to watch out for will be, the update on the whistleblower allegations, investigations, and perhaps more importantly, we're keeping an eye on the banking and financial sector and the kind of client spending that the company is witnessing at this point in time, considering there has been a lot of volatility in this aspect. But on the whole, we're expecting a steady quarter for Infosys.
All right, of course, you can stay tuned to BloombergQuint. We'll bring you live updates as and when we get them on Infosys results. Meanwhile, let's turn to another story. A family dispute within the Murugappa Group has now come out into the public, with the elder daughter of former group chairman M.V. Murugappan accusing other family members of gender bias. Speaking to Menaka Doshi and Sajit Mangat, Vali Anurachalam has said that it was her father's wish that she, her mother and her sister sell their collective stake of around 8% in the holding company, that's Ambadi Investments, to other branches of the family, which she wants to execute, or at least to get a board position in lieu of the stake that they hold. Listen in.
His wish was that we offer the shares of the holding company to the family. And that is exactly what we've done. But the family, but there have been a lot of challenges along the way. The family has said they do not have the money to keep the shares and collect the dividend. Although we have been following up regularly to try to implement my father's wishes exactly as he wanted, that has not happened. And therefore, in August of 2019, we have asked for board representation. And I think it is a fair ask, because if in Ambadi, the shareholders and the owners are one and the same, because 91% of the company is owned by the family. So if the other branches in the family all have representatives, why can't our branch also have a representative in the holding company?
Okay,
so that's where we are.
Can I ask you a question? You said that it was your father's wish,
yes,
that you seek to sell the shares to any of the branches of the family that already own substantial stakes in Ambani. He would have envisaged, given that this board is entirely male, that it has been, for the longest time now been populated only by male members. You have mentioned this is the first time that a family member has bequeathed shares to children that are not male or female, yes, as popularly known.
Yes.
And so he would have envisaged this situation that for you to find a seat on the board would be close to impossible, given the way this seems to work.
Well, I think his wish is what is central here, and his wish was that we offer it to the family. Beyond that, I cannot comment what would have been in his mind.
Okay. Well, did you all discuss this before at any point in time when he was alive and when he was on the board and he was a critical member of the board of Ambani, as to what would happen given that no woman has ever got representation on the board, so that the only option really was to sell those shares to other branches of family, of the family?
That's something that never really came up. Both my sister and I, we had families, successful careers. Both of us are well educated, and we had our own lives, and so this was not front and center, but it has become front and center after my father has passed away.
Did you ask them why they're denying you a board position?
Yes.
And what did they say?
I mean, in the sense that, let me rephrase it.
Okay.
So when I asked for a board position, they gave various reasons as to why I cannot be on the board.
These reasons being?
First, they said I was claiming it as a succession right, and I indicated to them that in the very first ask, I said it was based on our shareholding. And then they said it was because I did not have enough experience in the group companies, to which I said, well, female members are never given that opportunity, so please don't discriminate against us because of our gender. And then they said that it's because female members have never asked for a board position. But then I've been asking all along for a board position. So then finally I gave this example which I just of Mr. M.M. Murugappa, and since then I've not had any further communications on this matter.
In the auto space, Mahindra & Mahindra is looking to ramp up its electric vehicle portfolio as it sees shared mobility as the future. The company is looking to launch the electric version of one of its most popular models, that's the XUV 300. Nishant Sharma spoke to the company's Chief of International Operations, Arvind Matthew, who also spoke about the company's joint venture with Ford. Listen in.
At the moment, the way that the financial equation works out is that the total cost of ownership benefit that electric vehicles have is if the vehicles are driven 180 kilometers and up. And the only people who do that are the guys who are in the shared mobility space. Now, there will be personal use guys who will buy electric vehicles, but they're not buying it because it's cheaper for them to run. They're just doing it because they firmly believe in, protecting the environment. But from a business perspective, if you're running a vehicle more than 180 kilometers a day, you're actually making money compared to internal combustion engines. And the only guys who can do that are the guys in the shared mobility space. And we see that at least for the next 2 to 3 years, until battery prices come down. That's when we believe that the parity between internal combustion and electric vehicles will happen in the next 2 to 3 years. Also, you'll see an increase in cost of vehicles with Bharat Stage 6 coming out. And so in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll see more passenger vehicle adaptation happening, and we'll have vehicles for that segment available at that time.
All right. Also give me a sense of what are the challenges in terms of infrastructure as well are there right now, because there are two kind of models. There's a battery swap model which has been prevalent for 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers, not for 4-wheelers essentially, but as far as the infrastructure development is concerned, would you looking to invest in that as well?
So in terms of charging, we will invest in making chargers, just normal chargers for three-wheelers and four-wheelers. We're not into building fast chargers. That's not our domain. We are not looking to install charging infrastructure. That's not our domain either. So we will be really a manufacturer of charging equipment. When it comes to swapping, we are open. We already have the technology for fixed batteries, swappable batteries, range extending. We just need to make sure that there's a common standard. When you get into swappable batteries, there has to be a standard, because I should be able to swap batteries between vehicle manufacturers. If I can't do that, then we're looking at, very specific battery swapping per manufacturer, which doesn't make sense. So we'll wait and watch. When the standards come out, we will suit whichever segment it requires the technology.
And coming to Ford Mahindra partnership, what's happening there? What's the roadmap?
So I think when it comes to the Ford Mahindra partnership, there's clearly benefits. I think it's already in the public domain that Ford and Mahindra are going to share platforms, vehicle platforms, and when you do that, the engineering costs are now spread over a much larger base. With all the regulations coming in terms of emissions, in terms of crash, it's becoming humongously expensive to engineer new vehicle platforms. And the more sharing goes on, I think it benefits both partners. Also, when you have much larger scale, you can then negotiate lower prices on components that go in, so your vehicle costs come down. And I think the third element where there is clearly a benefit is in distribution globally. I think Ford's distribution globally is very, very strong. They've been around for more than a century, and they know they're in most countries around the world. So I think there's opportunities for Mahindra to leverage Ford's network globally, and it's opportunities for Ford to leverage Mahindra's network in the Indian subcontinent, where not just in India, but if you look around India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, we clearly have a much stronger network here. So if you put the three things together, I think it's a win-win for both companies.
All right, let's take you through some of the stories you'll find on the website BloombergQuint.com if you were to look right now. First up, unfazed by projections of India's GDP growth slowing to an 11-year low in 2019-20, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said yesterday that the fundamentals of the Indian economy are strong and it has the capability or capacity to bounce back. The Prime Minister has, over the past few days, held 12 brainstorming sessions with different stakeholders over various issues affecting the economy and to thrash out appropriate policy interventions in union budget that is coming up at the end of the month, or rather the beginning of the next. On Thursday, he met economists, private equity and venture capitalists, business leaders and agri-experts at the Niti Aayog and called for focused efforts to achieve the target of making India a $5 trillion economy by 2024. And speaking of meetings, Prime Minister Modi could soon be meeting Amazon founder and Chief Executive Officer Jeff Bezos, who will be visiting India next week. And finally, education startup Byju's, which is operated by Think and Learn, has said it has raised an undisclosed amount of funding from Tiger Global Management. PTI has reported that the number could be as high as $200 million. All right, that's all you need to know going to trade today, but do stay tuned. Like I said, there's lots to talk about. You'll find all of that on BloombergQuint.com. Thanks so much for watching.